In today's video, I want to show you how to make a reverse strip pieced block. Hi, I'm Kim Jamieson-Hirst of Chatterbox Quilts, and I love using my scraps to make strip pieced blocks. And I often make them a certain way that makes it really easy to create different designs when I put the blocks together into a larger project. So I often have them where there's white in the center, or at least a light color fabric in the center, and then colors on the other side. So for example, here I've got two of them where I've got the white in the center and different shades of blue on either side. So that's how I usually like to make them. But I thought, what about if I reverse that and I put the color in the center and then use some low volume fabrics on either side? What would that look like? Well, this is what it would look like, right? So let's talk about how to do this if you're not familiar with making strip piece blocks. So first off, you need a foundation. You'll see on the back I've got some paper, and I like to use paper from catalogs like this. So it's kind of shiny. It's not very thick, it's fairly thin, which is good, so that I can stitch easily through it. So I just cut it to whatever size I'm going to be using for my block. So for example, this is a 6.5 inch piece of paper. Right now it's going to be fabric eventually. And then I'm ready to start making my strip piece block. Now, one caveat when you're working with any kind of a backing, make sure if it's printed like this, and I should say paper backing, if it's printed, that ink is not going to come off on your hands, which means it won't come off on your fabric. So I've got my base here and I want to start. So I'm just going to put my sample out of the way here. And how I start is by taking my fabric. In this case, I'm using blue, right? We're sticking to blue today. And I just lay it across on a diagonal on the block, about like that, okay? Right side up. Now this is a batik, so it's kind of hard to tell what's the right and wrong side. There's an advantage for using batiks in your projects, but it would normally be right side up. And then I'm going to take my first strip, I'm going to use this white one, and I'm going to put it right side down. Put it this way actually. Okay, now if you want to, you could pin this down if you think it's going to be uncooperative and move around or something, but it doesn't have to be perfect, right? Perfect-ish is perfectly fine. So let's get it there. Okay, and then I'm just going to stitch a 1/4 inch seam, or approximately a 1/4 inch seam, along here to attach it to that paper foundation. So once I get it underneath my needle here, I can always just double check, make sure it's where I want it to be before I start stitching. All right. Okay, if it doesn't perfectly match along the edges here, that's okay. As long as your stitches are going to catch that fabric in a bit from the edge, you're good. Okay. And I did decrease my stitch length a bit. I'm working with a 2.1 right now, so a little bit less than what it suggests for the default, just to keep everything together. And we are going to be tearing this paper off, so I want to make sure it doesn't damage any of my stitches or break them, so making them a little smaller helps to prevent that too. Okay, so I've got that first piece down. You can see that I just rolled it open using my seam roller here. This is a Violet Kraft seam roller. If you're interested, check up above in the description below. You'll have a link for that. Or you could, of course, press it if you wanted to, but since I'm at the machine and I don't want to get up, it's easier just to use my seam roller. Okay, let me get a piece of kind of goldy fabric, or a little bit of a light tan here. And I'm just going to keep building onto this one side until it's covered. Okay, and you want to make sure that your fabric always extends past your foundation, right? Because it has to cover it all. And if I've got a long piece like this, I could have cut it first if I wanted to, but I often just add them on and snip them as I go along, right? And I'll be ready for another project. And we're going to get this one pressed down nice and flat as well. So I'm just going to keep going until I've covered this side, and then I'll come and start on the other side and show you what that looks like. And one thing I just want to mention too, you can see I'm almost at the corner here, but this is just a little tiny piece. So if I just covered that, when I go to sew this into a project, I'm going to lose a 1/4 inch here, going to lose a 1/4 here. I'm going to see this itsy bitsy piece of fabric, which is going to look really weird. So to avoid that, what I like to do is to make sure that I have a bigger piece in the corner, and I can do that one of two ways. First off, of course, you need a bigger piece of fabric, but I could, if I wanted to, trim this back, or I could just take my fabric and move it back from the edge, okay? Totally up to you which one you want to do. So if I move this back and I sew it here, it's going to cover more than just that little area. So that's what I'm going to try and do here and see how that works out. All right, I'll just cut off this excess here. And we'll open it up. Now, if I wanted to, I could trim that piece underneath there. It is showing up quite a bit. This is quite thin. I think this is a poly cotton actually. So I could trim that back if I wanted to, the seam allowance, so I don't see it as much. Of course, it will be something different underneath when I have that out of the way. I might trim it back. I might just leave it. Totally up to me. But at least now I've got a bigger piece of fabric in this corner here. So you're actually going to see some of it as you add it to your other blocks in your project. All right, so now starting on the other side, I just flipped it around. Same kind of thing. We're going to lay this down and we're going to stitch it with a 1/4 inch seam. This one does have a selvage on it, so I will probably cut that off again. Could cut it off before if I wanted to, but I'm going to cut it off afterwards, and I'm going to see after I've stitched it in how much fabric I want to show, because maybe I'll cut, you know, more than the selvage off. And I really like doing strip piece blocks. Uses up some of your scraps, for one thing. And also you can make some really cool designs in your projects with these blocks. And it's a great way to use leftover binding pieces, you know, anything that's a long strip. And I'm just going to cut this back. And I don't have to be super, super careful with this if it isn't exactly straight. That is okay as well, as long as I have a straight-ish line there, and that's too small a piece of selvage to keep for me. So off it goes. And we've got this. That looks a bit better. Okay, ready to add some more on. Let's see what I've got in here. Let's try this guy, see if he's big enough to add in here. I think he is. All right, I'm just going to put him on. Okay, off that comes. Over that goes. The other nice thing when you're making these, you can see how quickly this is coming together. I'm doing this in real time, right? And it's coming together very quickly. And you know what? I'm going to put the little chicks on the other side as well, because why not? Okay. It's really hard to tell what's the right and wrong side of this fabric, I gotta say. It's just surprising. But, all right, here we go with this guy. Alrighty, so there we go. So there's our block. Of course, it looks a bit weird right now because it needs to be trimmed. So I'm going to go trim this at the cutting table. I'm just going to trim it all around to the foundation, and then I'll come back and show you what it looks like. So I have trimmed up this block, and this is what it looks like. So the next step would be to tear off the paper foundation. All right, so as I said, I did a shorter stitch length. Makes it a little easier to tear this off, but I still like to put my thumb over the seam line when I'm doing this. The first ones are always the easiest ones because they're only attached on the one side. And then of course you've got the other ones that are attached on both sides, but still, I just kind of try and put my thumb sort of across them, or at least one of them. and just do it slowly. These tear off really easily. As I mentioned, the paper is quite thin. That's like always a good choice. Don't want to have anything really thick on here. You're not going to use cardstock or anything like that, right? So you just gently take off the paper foundation. And after that's all done, which takes almost as long as stitching the block because I'm being very careful. Then it'll be ready to put into some type of a project, right? So bear with me because I want to talk about different projects, what these blocks look like when you start putting them together. All right, almost done here. Oh, I have a very, very thin little one in here. But like I say, these come off really easily. I'm not seeing any issues with the thread or the fabric or anything. Let's just get rid of that, recycle that. Okay, so here's my little block. As you can see, you know, nice and supple, right? It's not as stiff as it was when it had the paper attached. So when you've got these blocks done, what are you going to do with them? What do they look like when you start putting them together into a project? Well, let's take a look. I've got a few examples for you that I've mocked up on EQ8. So the first one is a table runner. So I took 4 blocks. I actually used different colors in the center, not just all blue, but different colors, and I've arranged them in this way because you can arrange them different ways. If I arrange them like this, so you could just put them together, the 4 of them. You can quilt them together, quilt them however you would like, of course, and you've got a quick and easy table runner. What about a bigger project? Well, this is actually called Diamond Bright. This is a project that we have done in the Quilter's Way in my private online membership. You can check in the description below for details on that membership. And we did this one with the, if you will, normal strip piece blocks where I had white in the center. But it looks quite different when I change it up and have the different colors in the center. You still get the design, but you get a lot more of the, you know, light background, as it were. So that is another look. And then I have another one that I call Rainbow Bright. So this is a square one, a little different than Diamond Bright. And this one again has different colors in the center of the blocks. But again, you'll see just those strips of color here and there. And then you've got these lighter fabrics surrounding it. So you can play around with these different strip piece blocks, changing up where you decide to put different colors of fabric, whether you want to have a colored background with a lighter strip in the center, or whether you want to have those lighter backgrounds with the strip of color in the center. So you may be wondering, what else can you create using strips? What other kind of strip piece blocks can you make? Well, don't worry, I've got you covered. Check out this video that has all the information you need. And for more helpful quilting information, be sure to go to my website at www.chatterboxquilts.com.